being wisdom, because they have to balance. If you're just overbalanced on compassionate, you can lose yourself. You need kind of the pillar of wisdom to know right action, right speech, what's going to be healthy. So she put it in that context, but she asked me to speak about interfaith practice because I guess I speak up, at least with her sometimes, about from time to time about my connection from growing up with Christianity, because my dad was a Episcopal priest and I grew up immersed in that, and how I integrate that with being a Buddhist and Buddhist practice. So because of that, she asked me to speak about this. So that's what I'm gonna do in my own way.
Yeah.
So first I thought about, well, what is interfaith practice? What does that mean? What could it be? And I thought there's different aspects to it. There can be like what Chris is doing, leaders and members of various spiritual traditions gathering together to pool their efforts towards some sort of political or helping end. And they're doing it out of the deep spiritual resources of their tradition and finding that in a deep way, our traditions do not prevent us from connecting. Rather, they enhance connection and they help bring down barriers. So she's doing that. And so that's one aspect, is interfaith political action, and interfaith or action for the community. Another aspect, as I was thinking about it, of interfaith practice is just an individual or group curiosity about the varying faith traditions and what they mean to other people, and opening just on a personal level, one-to-one, or dialogue, to try to understand what another person maybe believes, feels so strongly, that might be somewhat different from us, but where we have perhaps commonality. So that's another part. And for me, that's always been pretty important. And also, as an important way to connect, a third aspect of interfaith is connecting with one's, if one has it, any childhood, early family background of religious or spiritual experience and tradition. So for me personally, but this is just for me, not everybody's experience is really different. For me, I find that my Zen practice has totally deepened my understanding of my Christian upbringing, and vice versa, that things from Christianity have totally opened some understandings of our Zen practice and Buddhism. And it's kind of weird, but sometimes, I'll go to like Sesshin. I was just in Sesshin with Everyday Zen, and I'll be sitting there and suddenly some phrases from the Psalms or the Gospels or something will come up, but tweaked, like in a new way, like a new understanding, maybe, yeah, a different way of perceiving it. And vice versa, I can be, if I do go to church, which I do on occasion, I can be sitting there and then all that fills my mind are Zen sutras, or Buddhist sutras, and I see those connections. So for me, it's been helpful. And I also had an experience of interfaith practice as a teenager. Because when I lived in Indiana as a teenager, it was in the late 60s, early 70s, but there was, the civil rights movement, there was a lot going on. And we lived downtown, and there were a number of downtown churches of different denominations. And like my boyfriend at the time, his father was the Methodist minister, and I had a good friend who, her dad was the Presbyterian minister. So all these ministers and the Catholic Church all kind of got together in an ecumenical interfaith group. And me and my friends who were from different groups, and some of them didn't go to any churches, they just were our friends and were interested too. And like some were Jewish and some had no upbringing. We got together, sponsored by the Interfaith Alliance of the downtown churches, to form a group which we sort of pretentiously named the Student Action for the Betterment of the Community. But that's what we were oriented toward, doing something, and we actually did. We did agitate, and with the support of these ministers of these churches, agitate at our high school, because we had about 11% Black population and no teachers or counselors or anybody who was African American or Black, no people of color, and we did agitate, and ended up the next year that we got a faculty member and a counselor who were Black, who were people of color. So that was pretty good. We also had some retreats that we went on that these Catholic nuns, who were just amazing, led. These particular Catholic nuns, who I think did leave their order eventually. I think they just couldn't abide by it all. But they were wonderful and brought us together. So I have had that foundation in that way. And as I said, some of our friends were Jewish, and they were part of it too. Now, in speaking of this, I realize that some people may have had totally different experiences growing up. Some people have been quite wounded by various faith traditions, whatever it is. It could have been through, clergy abuse, could have been through dogma that was not at all helpful, could have been through shaming or blaming, and just really horrible things. So in making this talk, I understand that we all come from different backgrounds. And perhaps I was thinking about it, if you come from a background where the experience has been very wounding of a previous faith practice, it would be most important to really stay steady in this tradition that you're in. And then if you wanted to do any interfaith work, it might more be toward working with others to bring awareness to some of the abuses or the dysfunctional practices that have happened, experiences, but in a way that's informed by our understanding that we are all deeply interconnected at the foundation, and that is informed by ability to really listen and understand what another person is experiencing. So basically, this idea of interfaith practice is about breaking down the silos that we find ourselves in. We get in the silo of this tradition or that tradition, or many other silos outside of any faith tradition, right? We tend to be in our comfort zone and otherize other people. So I think that this practice and just consideration of interfaith practice is about how to break down these silos. And this is where it really dovetails with what I think Chris was trying to bring out, on Tuesday. We find that we all want the same thing. We all want to be happy and to be loved. That's pretty basic. Most people want that. And we also realize from our tradition that there is no separate self. We're all intimately, interconnected. And what we do or think affects the world. And so toward that end, I want to read to you something. I think Chris read it, this quote, possibly on Tuesday. Last night, I was at a concert and she sent me an email with several quotes. And all it was a picture of the text. So I don't actually know what book she took this one from, but I thought it was appropriate. So I'm bringing it back today to kind of continue to ground our experience. So this one is from a book about the relationship between Martin Luther King Jr. and Thich Nhat Hanh. And the author of the text says, I'll just kind of start, I just have a Xerox of a picture, right? It says, it can be hard to grasp what an interconnected world is like. That's really true, particularly in our time, right? We're getting more polarized. For King, it meant that each part of the whole and the whole itself suffers, even when the smallest, seemingly insignificant part suffers. So when you or I suffer, or somebody who's being jailed, or anybody suffers, the whole of us suffer. The letter, and I think this is a letter from a Birmingham jail, but I'm not sure. So don't take that for sure, because I don't have the context here, is an early statement of King's belief in the interconnectedness of life. So now this is King speaking from a letter. I am cognizant, and maybe it's a letter to Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't know. You think, yes, maybe Marilyn, thank you. Thank you for helping me. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned by what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, quote, outside agitator, unquote, idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere in this country. So that's kind of the whole context that all of this is within. So as I was putting this together, it jumped into my mind, oh, in this country, we have the separation in our Constitution, the separation of church and state. Now, you might think, well, does that mean less interaction? No, it means more. Because we keep church and state separate, we can honor all traditions. It's one of the strengths in our country. And I think at this point, it's something we need to pay attention to because I think it's being threatened. And that would be something that interfaith alliances could address, that, hey, there's separation of church and state so we can honor all the traditions and all of us can practice freely and dialogue and understand each other. So the next thing that came into my mind, because I sort of just meditated on this and wrote down notes, when speaking with persons of other faiths, it's important to pay attention to our emotions and what arises as speaking, and to be aware of maybe a desire to, if say the person says something that you go, whoa, that's nuts, or I don't believe that, or something, take a breath and maybe don't respond to that. Maybe just listen and then express what's true for you. So there's a listening and dialogue. And I have an example of that from a conversation I had about, I don't know, a month ago at my mechanic. Now, this is a new mechanic to me. And I was talking with the guy who kind of checks you in and everything. And there wasn't anybody else in the little office there. And my car was being worked on. And so I was telling the guy, well, yeah, you can call this number, but I'm a therapist, you'll get my therapy message. And then the guy starts saying, oh, I don't do that stuff, that therapy stuff, but well, I'm a Christian. And then he starts to talk about, quite surprisingly, a very horrific and tragic death of his son in early 20s, in his early 20s, just tragic, but talking about how he found this church, his pastor, and I think it's a pretty conservative church with, a lot of structure and guidelines, and yet he was talking about how it has helped him with his grief, has helped him find his life again and purpose. And so I thought, well, I didn't agree with everything he was talking about at all, right? But some of the things he said I thought were a little off the wall. But that doesn't matter. My judgments are irrelevant. What mattered was my sense that this man was receiving healing for a tremendously difficult experience, and this is what he needed. We all need different things at different times, so we have to have compassion and understanding. That's that compassion wing. And for me, the wisdom wing was not saying, yeah, but what you just said didn't make any sense. No, just keep breathing. And I mentioned, oh, well, I had a Christian background and blah, blah, blah. And we ended up having such a sweet conversation. I'm not going to go to his church. And well, I didn't mention I was a Buddhist because it just didn't seem right at that moment. I could have, but I didn't. But we connected. And so that is important, I think, how you can connect. And it brings up another issue. When talking with somebody of a different faith, you can hear what they say, maybe they can hear what you say, but it's not necessary to understand doesn't mean you agree. It's really important to know that you can be curious about and listen and try to understand for the other person without feeling that that you're agreeing to it. You just don't say one way or another, or you do say if you need to, but listening doesn't imply agreement, but it does imply its connection, and that's important. Well, I want to give you some examples of some relationships among religions and some just down-to-earth examples. Last week I was at Sishin with Everyday Zen. We were with the sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary. And they're lovely people down by Santa Cruz. Wonderful, right on the water. Yeah. Well, in their opening, welcome to us, the sister said, oh, and sister so-and-so who lives over here said to tell you she'll be praying for you. And we'll be praying for you too. And it wasn't praying for you that you should not be a Buddhist and should be a Christian. It was praying for you to have a really full, wonderful retreat. That's what it was about. And so our leaders said, and we'll be holding you as we have our retreat. It was really quite lovely. And then at the retreat, Norman Fisher, who was leading it, well, he mentioned several times about his rabbi. He says, well, my rabbi's here. And she came last year too. My rabbi's here. And later on he talked about, and we'll be celebrating Shabbat Friday at 7. If anybody wants to come, we're going to have a Shabbat altar and do the chants. And we did. I didn't go to it, but I was doing something else, but they did. And later on Saturday, they had another sort of closing, service to it in the dining hall. So, and Norman and his rabbi lead Makor Or, which is a Jewish meditation group that Norman and Alan Liu originally began. And Norman, he's a big fat Buddhist, right? I mean, he's well known, and he's still practices in his Jewish tradition and finds no conflict. So that's helpful. I think it's helpful. And then we remember Sister Judy. Some of you remember Sister Judy, who used to come. She lives in Southern California now. She's getting quite up there. She's a sister of St. Joseph of Orange is her order. Mm-hmm. And she has a rakusu. She used to come and sit with us all the time. And so, and found no conflict, just joy. I want to share with you a little bit from a little book. A woman in our community, our co-housing community, was a Buddhist with a different sangha, but she passed away, and this was one of her books, Brother Lawrence, a Christian Zen Master. Now, Brother Lawrence, I'll read a little bit about him, but basically he was a monk, and he had sayings that were compiled into a book called The Practice of the Presence of God. And he uses the God word, of course, but I don't think God for him meant some white dude with a white beard, some old guy, you know. It more was akin to our sense of zazen, or of our awakened Buddha nature. You know, it was expansive, and he felt it within. So you have to, when you hear the word God, you have to realize it's not a white guy with a big beard. That's not what he means. Well, I will read you a little about him. He was a Carmelite monk born in France in the early years of the 17th century, and he was no great intellectual. He didn't leave behind a detailed biography or theological treatise. We know only a few facts about him. One, that he felt guilty for failures that he never described, and he considered himself to be clumsy and awkward. And yet, somehow, with his ordinariness and humility, he attracted a lot of followers. His original name was Nicholas Herman. He joined the army, but then got injured. So then eventually he entered the Carmelite monastery in Paris as Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. He complied with his superior's instructions regarding prayer time. He read spiritual books. He was told to read. Neither activity brought him as great an awareness of God as had an experience he had at age 18. Which I'll read about in a moment. So eventually, some of the cardinals of the church noticed this and came and interviewed him, and they wrote down some of the things he said, and then also in letters. So this book, The Practice of Presence of God, was taken from these, the cardinals, and from their book, and from just some letters he wrote. So this was his original awakening, and it sounds like a Zen awakening. The winter I was 18, I stood looking at the bare branches of a tree. I realized that in time the leaves would grow again, and then flowers would bloom on the branches, followed by fruit. My awareness was suddenly opened so that I saw God's great strength and care. That realization has never since been erased from my mind. This new understanding cut my ties to the world, and it lit in me such a great love for God that I cannot tell whether it has increased over the course of the more than 40 years I have lived since that moment when I stood looking at the tree's naked branches. So that was his awakening experience. It sounds like a Zen one. And so then there's these quotes do not necessarily match word for word, but the book it's a paraphrase of him, and then it has Zen quotes to match each one of these. So the Zen quote that goes with this is, mountains and rivers, the whole earth, all manifest forth the essence of being. The old pine tree speaks divine wisdom. And that was something that a monk, Zenrin Kushu, wrote. Let me give you another short one. This one, he says, God is within you. Don't look for the divine presence anywhere else. And Ayakema, the Buddhist quote is from Ayakema, the Buddha is as near to you as your own heart. So this is a really lovely little book, and I knew of it. I knew of Brother Lawrence back in my 20s. And you know, from St. George Holmes, right? Yeah. But this is quite interesting. So just a couple other things, and then we're going to meet in small groups. First, I just thought about the dialogue of friendship between Archbishop Tutu, who's passed away now, and the Dalai Lama. and there's a book between them, and you just see all this joy and laughter. Not that they switched to each other's practice, right? They both stayed with their own, but they had a deep love and fun. And then Thich Nhat Hanh has a couple books, Living Buddha, Living Christ, and Going Home, Jesus and Buddha as Brothers. So if that was ever interesting, I've read the Living Buddha, Living Christ. It's pretty good. Well, I'm sure there's many, many other examples from other faith traditions. I'm not so familiar with other traditions, obviously, but perhaps you are. And the sisters at where the Sesshin was, they must be aware anyway of other traditions, because there was a poster on the wall outside of the Dokusan room. And this poster, it's a bad picture of it, but it's a nautilus shell. You know how it spirals in to the center? And in the center, out from that is coming the words, all, and who does not want to be treated with love? And then all around it are sayings from various faith traditions. I'm going to read them to you. From Baha'i, blessed are those who prefer others before themselves. From Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. From Jainism, in happiness and suffering, in joy and grief, regard all creatures as you would your own self. Judaism, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. From Sikhism, be not estranged from one another, for God dwells in every heart. Islam, no one is a believer until you desire for another that which you desire for yourself. Zoroastrianism, human nature is good only when it does not do unto another whatever is not good for its own self. And Christianity, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So our basic interconnection is very solid. We just get mixed up in our little silos. So what I'd like to suggest as we go into small groups, and let's take at least 12 minutes, let's say 12 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Let's, since it's 10 minutes, let's do pairs. Do pairs, and